Chance Encounters, Danilo Kis, Personal History and World Literature. Greetings to all of you in Montenegro and elsewhere who are watching this brief recorded lecture. Thank you for this invitation to speak a little bit about Danilo Kis from my perspective as a historian of the 20th century and a literary translator. I am grateful to Dr. Novica Vujovic for the invitation to make this presentation. In addition, I am happy to note that this is my first collaboration with the Fakultet za crnogorski jezik I književnost in Cetinje, and I look forward to more common projects in the coming months. This talk is intended to commemorate the birthday of one of the greatest writers of 20th century Europe. Danilo Kis had strong, lifelong connections to Montenegro, so I think it is very appropriate that your university wishes to call attention to the enduring legacy of his works in the form of essays, dramas, poetry, short stories, and, above all, novels. The notions of personal history and accidental encounters in this talk are important as they apply not to me, but to Danilo Kis, since my only goal is to circulate some thoughts about him that might be fresh or challenging. But I will also mention a few of the circumstances that accompanied the beginning of my engagement with Kis's works and ideas, if only as an attempt at amusement or for the closing of a formal circle. With the phrase global literature, I hope to underscore not only how important and popular, but also how enduringly bold and modern the writing of Danilo Kis has proven to be. Kis's personal history begins, of course, with his birth, which he described as an ethnographic rarity. The wide spread of the roots and branches that delineate his life live in the Vojvodina, Montenegro, Belgrade, Hungary, and in Yugoslav Jewish and French culture. A strikingly coherent and successful artistic life was the product of these cultures, clashes, and individual vision and determination. People familiar with Kis's biography, in addition to his works, might recall the terrifying events of January 1942 in Novi Sad, which the future writer survived only by chance, an early blaze on his trail through the Shoah. What follows is Kis's trek through and past singularly parallel ideological and cultural formations, fascism and communism, Central Europe and the Balkans. On a much different register, consider the timing of Kis's literary life, beyond his control. That is to say, the nature of the era in which he wrote, the period of late modernism, on the cusp of postmodernism, so that when Kis returns to the essay, by which I mean topical nonfiction explorations in prose, the milieu and the métier have shifted radically. The sense of Čas anatomia is much different from 1960s Izlet du Paris or his early essays on poetic revolutions, for instance. My first encounter with Kis's work was in 1990. I was in the early years of graduate school at Indiana University and had, of course, heard my professors mention his writing. But I had not yet read anything by him, not even A Tomb for Boris Davidovich, which was the introduction to his world for most of us. The encounter occurred during my language proficiency exam in what we at the time called Serbo-Croatian. After 4 semesters of study, I had to take an extracurricular exam to satisfy program requirements in history and in the Russian and East European Institute. The 2 professors I faced, one American, one Croatian, marched me through a conversation exam and then handed me a single piece of Xeroxed paper with an article in Cyrillic script. I had to translate the article, unaided, at a nearby desk. The article was an obituary for Danilo Kis. Kis had passed away just months before. It made a huge impression upon me that my professors thought so highly of Kis that they used this text in their teaching. And years later, I found this same article from the Yugoslav press as I was researching for the historical introduction to one of Danilo's novels that I had translated. It reminded me, an almost tearful me, that when studying in Szeged, Hungary, much earlier in 1986 and 1987, I went many times to Sobotka, or Subotica. It was a simple hop across the border with a U.S. passport, and my two pals and I went to this town, the town where Kiš was born, on many an early morning local train run for Jaffa oranges, toilet paper, which was in critically short supply in Hungary that winter, Jugotone cassettes, like those by the Talking Heads and U2, and Pionier Mlečna Čokoláda s rýžom. We did not even discover burek until a later trip that year to Sarajevo. But we did explore at that time Novi Sad, which we found to be a fascinating mixture of the self-confident and quaint, the bold and the bizarre. I had no idea what either of these cities meant to Kiš then. I would not even have recognized his name. But he has won. He prevailed. And of course, time has yoked all the significations into the service of a popular front of memories. And so what might it mean to refer to Danilo Kis also in the context of global literature? Sure, he's famous, all over the place, in many languages, certifiably and justifiably. But, as with the concept of world history, global or world literature is more than just the greatest hits of various countries. It is about convergences, parallel developments, asymmetric but reciprocal influences, and it is more about cultures or societies than just countries. Remember Kish's recounting of the luminaries of European poetry and prose, and his questioning of its arbitrariness linked to the self-importance of the major languages. The Kiš who suggested taking some of the West European writers out of the canon and replacing them with Endre Ody, Ivo Andrić, Miloš Crnjanski, and Miroslav Krleža. This is the same Kiš who recognized that Central Europe is more than Danubia and that the Ottoman legacy is part of European culture. Erasing, evicting, enabling, and encoding difference, these are processes of globalization in literature. A section of Kish's artistic ethos, where he combines his thoughts on literature and history, is also global. He sought unobstructed views for his focus, unhindered by place, age, considerations of utility. Consider these pointed assertions of his, rendered here as paraphrases or quotes. Number 1, literature provides the death of a child, writ small, and historical disasters, writ large, with a sense and a significance and a chance at resistance to despair. Number 2, the writer's job is to acquaint everyone with the world so no one can claim innocence. And number 3, Yugoslavia pulped a whole branch of literature by cheapening memoirs that sought to plumb the paradoxes of lived experience rather than serve political or commercial ends. The combined effect of beliefs like these is that Kiš wanted to do more than commemorate suffering or chronicle a disappearing civilization or even pursue the muddy quest for his father. And to do those things already commands our respect and even reverence. But Kish's untrammeled focus was global because the many elements of its genetic code included keeping the individual in history and keeping history in human time. Systems exclude. People, even in Kish's unsentimental rendering, die as outsiders, or they include. In conclusion, I'd like to share one of my favorite characterizations of Kiš, that he had a fresh historical mind. There are writers who are capable of immersing themselves and their readers in unexpected time periods and places. This is a kind of attraction and innovation that is separate, I would argue, from the form of their works, however innovative it may or may not be. I am referring here to Kish's short story, The Legend of the Sleepers, which is found in Encyclopedia of the Dead and was ably translated back in the 1980s by Michael Henry Heim. There are writers like E.L. Doctorow, Graham Greene, and Ralph Ellison in English, whose intense dramatic gaze and loping but hard-won historical fluency pull the writer into immediate explorations of unexpected places. This unexpected and rare power of Danilo Kis's work was one of the last gifts to become clear to me. It turns out that Kiš also left behind one unfinished novel. It is also entitled The Legend of the Sleepers, or alternately, The Sleepers of Ephes. This text, well over 100 pages in length, was written in the late 1960s. Perhaps it would be a fitting conclusion to my engagement with Kis's oeuvre to translate this lengthy fragment someday. At the risk of appearing self-absorbed, I would like to close with a brief poem that I wrote in Belgrade about 11 years ago. This was not a chance encounter, but rather very much a planned one, at the spot in the Novo Groblje where Kiš is buried. But I was in mid-arc of translating so much of his writing into English, and this poem, for me, captures the feeling of what it was like when I felt and thought that perhaps I was finally comprehending the big picture of Danilo's encounters with the 20th century. I was getting it from a distance, both temporal and geographic, from the beauty of his words to his ethics and consistent vision of life. Magical Bugs, An Hour at the Grave of Danilo Kis. For all the worlds, on the periphery of nothing, man of loss, iron seed, muddy rain, chains of leaf and lyric and sun, carnival of colored eyes, colonies of ideas, entangle, hunger, conjure, sing, carve, fold, splash, pound for the deserted revelation. Thank you.